All right, welcome to our next lesson on, well, early China, ancient China. This time we're going to get into the Zhou dynasty. Again, not Zhou, but Zhou dynasty. So in the last lesson we talked about the Shang dynasty, and we went over a lot of the cultural stuff like ancestor worship and most especially the mandate of heaven. So hopefully you remember the mandate of heaven because that's going to play into things right off the bat as we talked about the Zhou dynasty. So, really quick. Zhou dynasty follows directly after the Shang dynasty, and how they do so has everything to do with the mandate of heaven. Now, just like the Shang dynasty, the Zhou family lived outside of the boundaries, you could say. It's a little bit different of a story this time, but it's not like they were begging and begging to be part of it. Well, in a way they were. But they were always viewed as these outside barbarians. And they really wanted to be, in a way, included. But the Shang kind of looked down on them, like, you will not be part of us, you don't deserve to, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's a bit of civil strife within the kingdom, and the Zhou kind of were able to get an organization or a coalition together where they said, we're going to come in and be the saviors, you could say. And they get an army together, but it's a much smaller army than the Shang have. Now, when the Shang conquered the Shah, the Shang had a much larger army, as far as we understand. But when the Zhou go in to essentially restore peace and order, or to essentially do what they're going to do against the Shang, well, they have a much smaller army, a much, much smaller army. But in the very first battle, they're able to get some favorable ground, and they actually win the first battle against the Shang army. It wasn't a resounding victory, but it was just this idea where they caused the Shang to back off, to kind of rethink their strategy. But it was considered a victory for them. And that was the last battle that they actually would have, because all the Zhou had to do then is say, look at how small our army is. If we were able to beat such a large army as the Shang army that came against us, this is a sign that we have the mandate of heaven. This is the heaven saying that we get this. And a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I guess so. There's probably a lot of people that would agree with him in the first place, would be my guess, but it's kind of the way the record plays it, or the record, that's how we get the story, basically. And it's a fun story, but basically people are like, yes, they had the mandate of heaven. And even a lot of the soldiers in the Shang army are like, yeah, we shouldn't have lost that. They must have the mandate of heaven. Could have been a nice, convenient way to get rid of the Shang family, but that's what happens. The Shang family is essentially exiled, taken out of power, and the Zhou family comes in. Thus starting by far the longest dynasty in human history, not just Chinese history, but human history. About 900 years, the Zhou family controls China. It's so long that it's defined by three periods: the Western Zhou period, the Eastern Zhou period, and the Warring States period. Western Zhou period is where things are just good. Things are going very well, and it seems like life will always be good. Eastern Zhou period is where things are definitely on a decline, and the Warring States period is where just everything is definitely a decline, like civil war, just massive death and destruction. So, getting into the Western Zhou period. So, the city you're seeing right there, by the way, is the city called Xi'an. That's the capital of the Western Zhou period of the Zhou dynasty. The reason why is, I have the map up here. I don't know if you can see my... No, you probably can't. Well, if you've seen the map, it's right there, right on the edge of the empire. Excuse me. It's right on the edge of the empire. And the reason why was, it was guarding a very... Well, it was a place where barbarians would come in to attack the Chinese. It was the easiest place to come in. So they set Xi'an up there, fortified it, and for hundreds of years, they kept the barbarians at bay. Now, the way they did this is they relied on kind of a feudalistic, decentralized form of government. If you remember, we talked about centralized versus decentralized when we talked about the Shang dynasty, how the Shah were fairly decentralized. The Shang come in and centralize everything, more power to the top. And then the Zhou family comes and says, no, we're going to basically rely more on loyalty. You vow to us your allegiance and basically come when we ask you to. But other than that, do what you need to do. But for the good of all China, essentially honor your oath. It's seen as a weak form of government in that way. I mean, we hear the term feudal system all the time, but feudalism, its one major flaw is it relies completely and utterly on the idea, well, I wouldn't say utterly, but and completely, but mostly completely and mostly utterly on the idea of loyalty. And, you know, you just get someone who feels like they can be disloyal to kind of ruin things, and it ruins things. But in China's case, and I would assume it has a lot to do with the mandate of heaven, this goes really well for about 300 some odd years, 350 years or so, where they keep China safe. Now, I'm gonna bring back up that whiteboard I had last time, just to explain this, what the Chinese did, or what the Zhou family did in the Western Zhou period that was so effective. So, like I said, they're in this area of China where you know, the barbarians would usually come in to try to attack and plunder and things like that, and they were just a stopgap right there. The city of Xi'an was a stopgap. Now, that picture I had up there of Xi'an was, I've been there before. It still has its city walls around it. They're about 6 miles in circumference, so quite big. And I took a nice bike ride around the top, and I tried to go up some stairs, didn't realize that the bike I had was just awful and popped both tires. But anyways, I had to walk 3 miles back on it was like 95 degrees, pretty bad humidity. It was a hot day, let's put it that way. I'm not happy I popped my tires. But anyways, I showed you another picture on there that I showed you a bunch of Chinese gongs. I probably should have pointed this out when I was showing the pictures, but that comes into the story I'm about to tell you. There's a specific story from the history of China where we go from the Western Zhou period into the Eastern Zhou period. And it basically has to do with this, and how the Zhou family would protect off China. Let's see if I can draw this up here again, all right? So you got Xi'an, city walls basically kind of square, and you have this huge assembly area. And by the way, I probably should have pointed out in the picture, if you want to go back in the video a little bit, you saw that major assembly area. You could assemble hundreds of thousands of soldiers if you needed to. Again, a big army. Now, they didn't have the whole army there. They had a bit of a standing army there, but they relied on everybody else to come when they needed them. So they always had spies out and scouts out and say, oh, nope, the barbarians might be here in a few days, or heck, they're coming in a couple hours, I don't know. Something like that. And whenever the barbarians would come, or they knew they were coming, they need to assemble a bigger army than what they had at Xi'an. The emperor, and only the emperor, could ring a gong that was right in the center of the assembly area. Now, when he would ring that gong, men on the corners would then ring their own gongs. And then you'd have little villages out here like this, which would also have gongs. I don't know if you guys are getting the idea. So they would hear it, they'd ring their gong. They would hear it, they'd ring their gong, so on and so forth. And what it just meant was, hey, drop whatever you're doing, go grab your weapons and armor, mostly provided by yourself. Meaning that you took it upon yourself to essentially have the weapons and armor available. You would get to the capital city as fast as you could, assemble in the square, and just get ready to fend off the barbarians. And this worked incredibly well. Again, like I said, for a few hundred years this worked. But of course, things kind of go downhill at some point. And how it goes is like this. I'll go back to the PowerPoint. Hopefully you just kind of get this in your mind there. But how the story goes is this. Emperor died. Well, things go so well that the barbarians actually kind of just stop trying to attack. I shouldn't say kind of. They stop trying to attack. They realize this is fruitless. Every time we try, we lose more people. Maybe it'd be better if we just raided each other, you know. Our tribe will raid your tribe, you know. We'll stop confederating and we'll just stop going at the Chinese because it just seems fruitless. The Chinese are too good at what they do. So the Chinese, you know, the generation that was there, you know, that knew about the attacks, that had gone through it, you know, they taught the next generation, this is what you do. And they would have a practice. I don't know how many times they practice. I would assume like once a year, maybe twice a year. I really don't know. But they would have a practice. And so, you know, just to make sure everybody just knew what to do, Emperor would ring the gong on a predetermined date, so everybody knew it was going to be a practice. You hear it, you get all your stuff ready, you go, you line up, you get ready to basically fire drill, big time fire drill, I guess you could say. Then you go home. And go back to your farms, go back to your families and whatnot. So, the emperor, though, that went through the last barbarian raids, passed away. And then his son takes over. Now his son is young. When I say young, I can't remember how old he is when he takes the throne. The ages of like 8 or 9 kind of pops out at me, but I'd have to look up I'd have to look this up in my college book again. But so young guy, he also gets married really quickly, and the girl he marries is a couple years older than he is. So if he's like 9 years old, like his wife is about like 12 or 13 years older, or not older, but old. Sorry. So both very young. And the idea was, you get keep the family going, and your duty is to essentially protect China. And of course, you had ministers there that would help the young emperor out and what to do, and he would ring the gong. But it turns out that his empress, well, this is kind of where things go a bit, the empress is the one that really, really liked the gong drill, that nice gong fire drill. And so after a couple of years, she started just kind of, well, she begged and begged and begged for another fire drill. Probably saying things like, "It's my birthday. Can you please do it for me?" And at one point, the emperor relented and said, "Okay, just for you, I'll ring the gong." So he rings the gong on a day that was not predetermined as the day for the gong to happen. So when everybody else hears it in the fields, of course, like in those cities round about, they come rushing in. They're assembled. They're like, "Oh crap, this is in our time." Oh, something I kind of forgot in the story is it's been like 50 years since the last major barbarian attack. Like, again, I should have explained this earlier. When they would start doing the gong drills, it was more like a celebration at this point. Like, no one at this point really knew what it was like, the fear and the anxiety in place. When you have a barbarian raid, your life is at stake. Now the drills are more just, this is what we do. We're celebrating the idea that we've done so well, but we're still kind of practicing. So when you get this one, everybody's like, "Oh crap, I've never gone through this." There's this huge amount of probably adrenaline going on and just anxiety going on, and everybody's ready to do their duty for their country type thing. And then all that happens is the empress, this teenage empress, just kind of comes up and down the rows, congratulating everybody on how good they look, and then sends everybody home. So of course they probably went home a little bit disgruntled, like, what was that? Well, turns out she's able to get the emperor to ring the gong again a few months later. And of course everybody comes rushing, thinking, "Is this it? Is this it?" And of course the empress just walks up and down the rows, just saying, "You look good. This is my favorite thing in the world. This is awesome. How you look so pretty." And then sends everybody home. Of course, people are getting disgruntled. If you're thinking this story is about to turn into The Boy Who Cried Wolf, then you're exactly right. It's more like the Emperor Who Rang the Gong story versus The Boy Who Cried Wolf. But you get the same idea. Just to shorten the story up a little bit, I can't remember how many times she got him to ring the gong. 5, 6, 7. Again, I'd have to go look this up. But a lot of times to where, like in some cases, there was like people were getting home just to hear the gong again to come back. Especially if you're in something like harvest season, that's not a good thing to do. So it turns out that the barbarians attack. Of course, it's been 50 some odd years, and then they attack. By the way, there's total speculation on the side of historians, like someone must have tipped them off that that there was a weakness in place, but we don't know. Just as far as we know, the barbarians decide, okay, we're coming this time. So the emperor rings the gong. People start streaming in, and this is where, man, the moral of the story kind of sucks in this case. Do a lot of people not come? Yeah, a lot of people just say, "This is another drill. I'm not coming. It's probably harvest season, something like that. This is dumb. This isn't right." But of course, you're going to have those people who are like, "This is my duty. This is what I'm supposed to do. I better go." But not enough people come. And those people who were kind of the ultra-patriotic ones, the ones that were going to do their duty for duty's sake, don't ask questions type thing, they get run over. They get run over pretty good. Again, not the greatest story I like to hear, because we like to think that people that are going to do the right thing won't get jacked like that. But in this case, they do. Now, the people that don't come get jacked as well, because when the barbarians run over the city of Xi'an, which, by the way, the emperor gets away from, the emperor and the empress escape through a hidden passage in the walls. But the villages round about where the soldiers could have come from, or where the men were, they get ravaged as well. All their stuff stolen, people raped. Like, bad deal. Probably should have shown up this time. But Emperor who cried wolf or rang the gong story. Anyways, I had a fun time reading that story. I like to share it, but that is also the crux of the transition between the Zhou dynasty, the Western Zhou period, and the Eastern Zhou period. When you get to the Eastern Zhou period, which I'll go to now, basically everybody's thinking the emperor has lost it. The Zhou family has lost the mandate of heaven. So how do you figure out if they have it any longer? Well, you rebel. You proclaim yourself the emperor chosen by the heavens, and then you need to overthrow the Zhou emperor. Thing is everybody knew that would be easy to do because pretty much everybody thought that the Zhou family had lost the mandate of heaven at this point. But no one's willing to do it because there's so many people that have the ability to do this that they know that whoever the first one is to essentially say, I'm going to take that, everybody else is just going to gang up on them. And then the next person to get there, well, he'll get ganged up on. And then the next person, they'll get ganged up on. Like everybody kind of understood this was a gigantic political puzzle to be played. And so for about the 200 years, that is the Eastern Zhou period, 200 to 300 years, that is the Eastern Zhou period, is just this pivoting. And this goes on for hundreds of years. I mean, this is generational. Like, you got like fathers telling sons, like, I've made these alliances, you better keep them up and get more, and then you can be the new emperor. You can take the mandate of heaven. You will have the mandate of heaven. And that's just, this is passed on over generations. Anyways, sorry, I should have had this up, but basically I'm explaining everything I just put up there. That describes the Zhou period. And now they were able to fight off the barbarians, by the way, and then they were able to keep fighting off barbarians somewhat, but the Zhou family, scared of being on the frontier, moved to Luoyang in the eastern side of the empire, hence why they call it the Eastern Zhou period. Sorry, I keep getting notices here. Okay. So, when it comes down to it, though, after a few hundred years, everybody's just like, this is going to go on forever. We just need to figure out who has it. And that's what leads into what is called the Warring States period, where just everybody goes against everybody else. So I'm going to end the lesson here and just talking about these beginning two periods of the Zhou dynasty and how they're able to come in and do so well in the beginning, but towards the end, not so well. And then in the next lesson, we'll be talking more about the Warring States period, and more so, really the philosophies that come about during the Warring States period, because one of the things that they lose is the ability to be happy.